Sorry about that. My computer dropped it, and I'm not savvy enough to try to fuse these videos together. Um, anyway, I was in the middle of reading Levinas, right, and it was at a very important moment that the frames dropped. Anyway, to continue with Levinas, we are responsible beyond our intentions. It is impossible for the attention directing the act to avoid inadvertent action. We get caught up in things. Things turn against us. End quote. So that's the first essay in the book Entre Nous. Right? Turning back to the domain of literature and literary criticism, it makes so much sense to concur with W.B. that authorial intention should not be the standard of our criticism, no more than it should be the only standard for determining the role of a defendant in the death of someone else. Intention itself is such a narrow field of that which individuals affect, of that which individual minds are conscious of that which individuals do or accomplish. It is perhaps better to say that authors are responsible for their work, that we cannot assume intentionality in every word, pattern, or echo of the text. Perhaps it is also necessary to say that various levels of responsibility exist simultaneously between a text and its author, and that there can be no sovereign source or standard method for determining or mapping out the genetic code of the text. This would be the case not only for the author of the text, but also for its editor, proofreader, publisher, co-authors, and source materials or drafts. The web of responsibility for a single text, as for a single murder, expands swiftly to include other individuals, living and dead, familiar and strange, and other texts, past, present, and future. Once we move from the limited and crude model of intentionality to a model of responsibility and or complicity, things change a great deal, don't they? Let me read that again. The web of responsibility for a single text expands swiftly to include other individuals and other texts, especially once we move from the limited and crude model of intentionality to a model of responsibility and or complicity. This brings to mind the famous passage in there's several famous passages, but a famous passage early in Michel Foucault's Archaeology of Knowledge. Quote, "The frontiers of a book are never clear-cut. Beyond the title, the first lines, and the last full stop, beyond its internal configuration and its autonomous form, it is caught up in a system of references to other books, other texts, other sentences. It is a node within a network. And this network of references is not the same in the case of a mathematical treatise, a textual commentary, a historical account, an episode in a novel cycle. The unity of the book, even in the sense of a group of relations, cannot be regarded as identical in each case. The book is not simply the object that one holds in one's hands, and it cannot remain within the little parallelepiped that contains it. Its unity is variable and relative." End quote. Compare this with W.B. Quote, "There is a gross body of life," this is from the Intentional Fallacy, "of sensory and mental experience, a gross body of life of sensory and mental experience, which lies behind and in some sense causes every poem, but can never be and need not be known in the verbal and hence intellectual composition, which is the poem." End quote. I'm not claiming that Foucault and W.B. are saying the same thing here. They're certainly not, good God, right? But maybe it's worth thinking through the resonances between that phrase, a gross body of life, and Foucault's notion of the variability and relativity of what we refer to as a book, or we might extend that to, or a poem, right, or a text. If we're sympathetic with Levinas and Foucault, given the limitlessness, variability, and relativity of the book as a node within a network, and the individual act as something caught up in a whole web of unknown activity and unintentional consequence, then WB's choice to focus on the work itself, a new criticism's effort to organize a method of reading around a hard line bracketing out of external evidence, makes a kind of pragmatic sense, at least provisionally. And that's, I guess, what pragmatic would mean anyway. But yet Levinas and Foucault help illuminate a few of the limitations of WB's argument too. First, reading them, we begin to see maybe that WB cannot account for the discursive unity of literary studies in any sort of robust way. The intentional fallacy does not answer, though it provides several shorthand phrases for, the proper boundaries of the poem as the object of the critical gaze. Even saying that we might need a dictionary in order to give a good account of a poem is to insist that we need some kind of external evidence sometimes. Second, WB do not seem to have a rigorous theory of language or meaning. This is taken up by several critics of new criticism, so I won't really extend that point. But it is worth pointing out that they simply presume that what criticism does is give an internal account of a poem's meaning. Right? Third, there seems to be some sort of dissonance between wanting to privilege the internal evidence of a poem, that is, the words themselves, and the publicness of a poem. Right? They see it as logically coherent and consistent, but I'm claiming that there's some sort of fraughtness to that connection. What do I mean? Namely, that the publicness of a poem means that the poem itself, its words, its techniques, its verbal patterns, its allusiveness, has everything to do with its relationship to the external, or rather its embeddedness in the sort of network that Foucault is talking about. Why would this be a problem for WB? Because they have no account of the previous training that a reader might need in order to be part of the public that the poem is meant to reach, or that the poem could potentially reach. Moreover, it seems perfectly obvious that the public to which the poem is connected is itself plural, that is, engaged with several overlapping discourses and classes, right? But that the public is also specific and contingent to a culture, moment, and a region. Thus, WB's notion of the intentional fallacy may be pedagogically useful in the literature classroom, and initially provocative as a corrective to crude investigations of intentionality, in writing or in murdering. But a number of problems arise when we start asking questions about how exclusive or exclusionary their insistence on objective criticism can actually be. As Frantz Fanon points out, in, I believe it's Wretched of the Earth, though it may be in another work, appeals to objectivity are usually ideological. And we might push this alternative truism to the forefront and ask, in what ways is the emptiness of that word public in the intentional fallacy an alibi for ignoring questions about the competence or sense of belongingness required in order to participate in the work of criticism? Okay. So in texts I take up later in this channel series, I will be investigating specific arguments that I think will address these questions head on, and that will move us past the intentional fallacy, but retain some of its most powerful interventions. So, okay, I think the next essay I'll be assigning myself will be Roland Barthes' The Death of the Author, an essay that is often paired with the intentional fallacy, but I think it'll be fun to work through it slowly, and also to maybe point out some ways in which it differs. So, okay, thank you for watching if you made it all the way to the end.